Most media does not want you to realize how quickly and aggressively your privacy is being destroyed. And if you did learn, you wouldn't even trust the device that you're watching this very story on right now. In late January of this year, Apple acquired Israeli startup company QAI. This company was valued at $1.2 billion, despite having nothing more than a proof of concept. Seems a little strange, right? Well, not when you consider that their CEO is Avid Mazel. He is the founder of Prime Sense, which created the technology for Apple's Face ID. So clearly, he knows how to design valuable products. So what will his latest product bring to the world? Well, the truth is we actually don't know. See, Apple has not confirmed what they plan to use QAI for. However, if you go back to 2025, you will find that QAI had filed for a patent for facial skin micromovements. What is that? Well, it's technology that would be able to detect mouthed out words or words spoken too quietly for microphones to pick up, as well as identify and assess a person's emotions, heart rate, respiration rate, and stress levels through shining infrared light at your face. Here's an explainer.
What they did is they had a camera looking at a space with people in it. That's sort of like coming in from one eye. The other eye is the radio signals, so sonar from the Wi-Fi router. And they just learned to predict, like, this is where the human beings are. Then they took away the camera. So all the AI had was the language of radio signals bouncing around a room. And this is what they're able to reconstruct. So suddenly AI has turned every Wi-Fi router into a camera that can work in the dark, specially tuned for tracking living beings.
So for clarification there, infrared light is the same light shine on your face when you use a Face ID, right? So every time you unlock your phone, QAI would be able to evaluate your heart rate, your stress levels, your breathing levels, and even your words not spoken. That's pretty freaky. And it's not just Apple, by the way. Listen to what another major phone company is doing as well.
Most people won't even realize they've installed live surveillance in their own home. Xfinity calls it a feature, but this isn't smart tech. It's a silent wireless tracking system. And once your router can map your movements, you're not just connected, you're monitored constantly. This is how the surveillance state gets in. Not with cameras, but with conveniences. Not with force, but with features. And by the time people figure it out, the cage is already built.
You might think, if the Face ID is monitoring everything I do and watching my expressions, I'll just throw out my phone. I'll go back to a flip phone, right? Well, we both know you're not going to do that. But even if you did, it wouldn't matter, because as soon as you go home, you're going to be monitored again. In 2020, the IEEE granted approval for a technology called 802.11bf to be integrated into Wi-Fi routers. What does it do? Well, this technology allows something called Wi-Fi sensing, which can be used to track, guess what? Your heart rate, your breathing, your hand gestures, and movement around your home or office. This is made possible by the Wi-Fi router detecting how radio waves bounce off human bodies. So think of it like echolocation, right? The Wi-Fi router emits radio waves, and once they come in contact with a human, those waves bounce off. However, when they bounce off of a human, they change ever so slightly, and these changes can be detected by a router. This builds a silhouette of you for the router to monitor, which is how it can watch your hand gestures, your breathing, and your heart rate. This is nuts. You just want your Wi-Fi to work, right? And yet you're being monitored entirely by your router? So here's a scenario to consider, right? One that could be a very real possibility in the future. And to paint the picture, we want to remind you of a report we did just a few weeks ago on the AI kill switches in vehicles, right? As a summary of that story, Ford and other car manufacturers will be integrating an AI into their cars that can lock your car in place if it decides you're unfit to drive. So in our scenario, right, let's say one day the government chooses to do something that is not in the interest of the American people. You learn about that story because you read about it on your phone. But as you're reading it, that phone is monitoring your reaction to the information. It monitors your heart rate, your stress levels, your words, spoken or unspoken. And then this AI communicates with your car. So when you go to drive to work, maybe your car doesn't start. The AI is considering you too stressed to drive. Instead, you got to go back inside where you're essentially under house arrest. Why? Because when you go back inside, even if you put down your phone, even if you put it in a drawer, Your Wi-Fi is watching you, watching your heart rate, your breathing rate, and your movements. And you remain under house arrest until AI decides that you are obedient enough to rejoin society. This is not just dystopian. It is slavery to technology. And if AI is left unregulated as it is now, that scenario will be our near future. Let's talk about this concept of surveillance. Like, we know that there's a surveillance state that is ever growing, right? But I think some of how we're being surveilled is shocking to people as you learn about things like Wi-Fi routers that are using, echolocation to map out your shape and where you are in a room. This technology that's monitoring, AI technology monitoring your facial expressions for words that aren't even spoken to determine what you're thinking and feeling. This goes far beyond what I think most people think that censorship / surveillance regime actually looks like.
Yeah, and the thing is that censorship's going to be, surveillance is going to be unleashed everywhere. You've got these flock cameras that are going in to all the cities and streets that are monitoring every step that you take, where you go in, where you go out, your license plate, and it's being fed into these, fusion data centers. Think about like Palantir, but multiplied across basically a whole bunch of different companies. And those sensors are going to be fused, and they're going to be able to track your location wherever you go.
Yeah, well, exactly. Flock, I think most people have become familiar with this concept, right? You've got these cameras set up everywhere, and they are monitoring you. I think it's easier for us to almost understand, okay, there's cameras everywhere, they are watching everything we're doing and where we're going. But the idea that so many different technologies are being patented for the express purpose of monitoring you in ways that you don't even recognize you're being monitored. This story of the Wi-Fi routers that are able to find you in your location and kind of create this image of you so that essentially if someone's monitoring you, they can see you behind walls. Like there's no place where you're safe from being surveilled at this point. And all of this is being done under the concept that, well, these are private companies, right? These are patented technologies. But the fact is the Fourth Amendment still applies even to private companies. We have the right to not be surveilled constantly. And it seems like no one's really calling this out.
Yeah, and that's right. And what's really interesting is, the courts are trying to push this concept of privacy in your home into, anything that can be observed on the outside, can be, peered upon by authorities outside of your house. And what that's going to mean, beyond just, physically light bouncing off of your face, it's also going to be like, what does your Wi-Fi signal look like? What Bluetooth devices are active? Google had this program where they just took a car with a Wi-Fi sniffer and they just went by and they just started capturing everybody's, identifiers associated with their router so that they can improve, their geospatial, accuracy. They're using it, and what they say that they're using it for is just to improve the accuracy of geolocation, which may be true. But also that information is undoubtedly being fed into the intelligence agencies so that they can know where you are, what you're doing. And, even though you think that you're still private, the thing is that you're giving off all kinds of different signals that can be peered upon by authorities outside of your home.
Well, and that is precisely the problem, right? Is that authorities outside of your home are supposed to be able to, or forced to, required to get a warrant to be able to monitor you and to be able to search you. But with private companies, they don't have to do that. It's all this third party. And this goes all the way back to the original, Edward Snowden NSA gathering of data, right? And that's, 12, 14 years old now. And the concept there was, well, we're not actually the ones gathering all this information. It's Verizon and it's AT&T and it's all these private companies. They're collecting it and then we're gathering from them. And it's like kind of the workaround. And instead of fixing that problem, it feels like the problem's only become more exacerbated over time, and it's becoming worse and worse in terms of the new technologies and AI, because AI is doing something that I think many of us could not have predicted a few years ago, which is that it doesn't just monitor, it fills in so many gaps. And that doesn't mean that because an AI program reads your facial expressions and says you're having a terrible thought, you might be guilty of pre-crime. like Minority Report. Just because it does that doesn't mean it's true. It doesn't mean it's accurate. There's a lot of gap filling that happens with this, and yet so many people treat it like, including I think law enforcement, as if it is absolutely true.
Yeah, what you touched upon is a very important point. There's this concept of essentially third-party laundering of private information, right? It's not the government that's tracking you from your individual cell phone's location. That data is being collected by your telecom provider, and then what they're doing is that they're selling that pretty much on the open market. And they're totally fine with this until somebody on the right, for example, like Dinesh D'Souza, gets a hold of that data and is able to produce a film like 3,000 Mules, showing that there is, vote and election interference that's going on. And so, they're collecting all these signals. They're using third parties in order to do it. And then they're just like, well, we just bought it on the open market just like you're able to do.
Yeah, well, exactly right. And I think that's the argument that Flock uses, right? Oh, we're monitoring every car that goes by. We're watching what everyone's doing. But, we're a private company and we're just gathering this. And then we sell that data back to law enforcement entities. Well, law enforcement, if they are tracking you, are supposed to have a warrant to do so. If they're following you, there's supposed to be some judicial process for that. But again, they use this workaround of private companies. And so what happens is, I guess you would describe this as the modern day actual fascism, right? Which is that combination between private entities and private corporations along with government working together to create a more authoritarian state. It's not the fascism that you hear them scream about on CNN all day long, but it's a real form of fascism where you are monitored constantly by and controlled by private companies that profit off of essentially taking your civil liberties away and handing them over to a law enforcement apparatus that does not have the legal authority to be doing what the private companies do.
Right, and this reminds me a lot of Twitter and a lot of the employees that are working at Google. It was actually discovered that they were insiders with law enforcement, FBI. I mean, this is what came out with the Twitter files, right? So the government's sitting there saying, well, we don't control these third-party companies, but it turns out that you've got people that have been on the payroll of these intelligence agencies that have insider access and that have existing social network connections with politics. And what's happening is that it's forming this back channel where these corporations are becoming essentially quasi-state actors. And through that quasi-state actorship, they're able to act on behalf of the government and their interests, but are able to, at the same time, get shielded from these constitutional protections that, protect our data, to be, have control over our personal effects and our paperwork. Essentially, that's being leaked out through this information laundering right into the hands of government officials, so that when they want to ban your bank account or they want to censor you online, they can do it across all of these different corporations that they've got back channel access into.
Well, a really easy example of that for people to understand, if you go back to the Facebook fact-checking days, which feels so long ago, right? It was such a big thing for a short amount of time, and then it completely, disappeared. But when they were running that program right after COVID and during that time, if you went back and researched who the heads of those departments were in every single one of those tech companies, they were former FBI, CIA, NSA. And so there is like a revolving door between those, three-letter government agencies and tech companies. Just because they've done away with that program doesn't mean they've done away with the revolving door. I'll give you the last word here.
What's really scary is that we've got this new technology with AI that's been allowing surveillance to go to a level that no human would have thought of before, which is they're able to essentially read your lips, right, from a distance, and even if you attempt to obscure what it is that you're saying, they can take a light that's bouncing off your face. They can look at the muscle movements of your face. This is what QAI is able to do, and their technology is patented on. And they're able to get information about what it is that you're saying, even if you think that you're being discreet.
And again, a lot of it is gap filling. I mean, they think they know what you're saying. Whether or not you're actually saying it, that's a whole other question.